Money Arata. Hyperinflation could be arriving in the form of one of the largest economic experiments of all time. This experiment could result in a total collapse of the economy, or lead to a new monetary theory which could change the way money works. This experiment was beginning to take effect just a few years ago, but it gained definite leverage with a catastrophic crisis in 2020. And since nearly everything went into lockdown, crashing the economy, many countries began to just print money in order to stimulate the market. This worked in the short term. A lot of countries seemed to have recovered from the crisis. They reduced unemployment, they returned to normal bankruptcy rates, and the stocks recovered. But this may be the calm before the storm. For you to have an idea, in a little more than a year, these countries put nothing less than 40% more money into the market. And this has never happened before, and it may cause a worldwide economic collapse in the years to come. And as we saw in episode 3 of the Money Arata series, when governments print more money, they end up fueling inflation. The more supply there is of a good, the less value it has. Therefore, when there is more money in circulation, the money you saved ends up losing purchasing power. Now, just imagine what could happen when this increase in currency circulation reaches 40%. Something of this magnitude has never happened before, but a similar historic example could give us a clue as to what could happen in the next few years. This is not financial advice. Please read the full disclaimer before proceeding. The economic collapse in the Genghis Khan era is an example of what could happen in the next few years. To understand what could happen very soon with our money, we're going to go back in time to the 17th century in China. In that era, the merchants used copper coins as currency. But the problem was that carrying a lot of copper coins was not very practical. They were heavy, they took a lot of space, and they could also be easily stolen. It was then that someone had an idea. The merchants could just go and deposit their coins in a safe place. And then in exchange they would receive a piece of paper which guaranteed that they had that amount deposited. So basically it was a piece of paper signed by the bank, promising that they will guarantee that amount of money. So with this, the merchants could just use that paper, which was much lighter and easier to carry. This was the invention of the promissory note, paper money, and what we call now fiduciary money. Fiduciary is an adjective for some object whose value depends only on the faith, on the trust that is placed in it. If other people in China trusted whomever issued that promissory note, well, then they believed that the merchant had physically deposited some real copper coins somewhere, and they had the equivalent value to what was written in that piece of paper. Everything depended on trusting the person that issued that promissory note, who had the guarantee or had the backing that there was an equivalent value deposited in copper coins. Now, over time, China made a law where the promissory notes could only be issued by the government. It was the state monopoly for issuing money, which initially didn't bring any major changes to the economy because the money that was being issued by the government always had a backing. However, at some point, copper started to run out in China, and promissory notes continued to be issued but without the equivalent copper coins deposited. Now, do you know what happened? There was great prosperity in China. The Chinese started to test the limits. They began experimenting, issuing paper money without a backing. Well, something pretty similar to what governments around the world have been doing since the pandemic. Now, the Chinese thought that simply because they were the government, they could print money without suffering any unwanted negative consequence. Well, everything worked well for some time, until Genghis Khan appeared and began forming the Mongolian Empire. He conquered the Wall of China at the start of the 13th century, and his successors of the Yuan dynasty eventually conquered the whole of China. And this new Chinese Mongolian government, they just accelerated the emission of money without backing. Why? To finance the new colonization missions, the expansion of the empire. They believed that trust in the government was just enough, and they began printing money like never before. And that was considered the first state fiat currency. But we know what happens when governments start to put a lot of money in circulation. Inflation began to increase by a lot, reaching around 80%. That got out of control. Money lost its purchasing power, and the population became poorer and poorer. The empire collapsed, proving in practice that simply printing money to solve economic problems is not a strategy that works. Now, the current issuing of money could lead to a collapse as big as that of the Yuan dynasty. Issuing money without backing didn't end with the collapse of the Yuan dynasty in the 14th century. It continued until at least the 17th century when John Locke created the gold standard in England, theorizing that money was nothing more, nothing less than the very precious metal in which it was minted. Locke established a fixed framework which prevented the government from just issuing the amount of money according to their own will. And in this way, he was basically limiting the power of the ruler, just similarly to how the English constitutionalism of the time was doing. In the liberal theory, money is seen as a commodity. That is, its value is determined by the same way as the value of other goods, temporarily by the law of supply and demand, and permanently by the cost of production. And this theory was accepted and the gold standard was adopted across the world. Money went back to having a backing, a guaranteed value for almost 3 centuries, right up until the World Wars, the 1929 crisis, and the creation of the social welfare. All of this increased spending by the governments, who needed more money, and the gold standard continued to fall until it was officially abandoned by the United States in 1971, generating a ripple effect in other countries. Since then, the governments have issued money whenever they wanted to put more money into circulation, and this alone was a big problem. But it reached a level which has never been seen before the 2020 crisis. And this is why I said in the beginning of our conversation that we are in the middle of one of the greatest economic experiments of all time. Now, if history was to repeat itself, we're close to a collapse, similar to that one that was happening in ancient China, along with the disadvantage that today the entire global economy is connected. So instead of a regional crisis, we could suffer an international crisis. But maybe that will not happen. And a new economic theory will emerge from this experiment, basically changing the way we understand money. Issuing money on a large scale could lead to a new modern economic theory. If the traditional liberal economic theory is right, in the next few years, the world will face a hyperinflation that could destroy the global economy. It would be a natural consequence after the governments put extra 40% of money into circulation after the pandemic. It was a result of desperation. At the beginning of the crisis, the stock markets collapsed. Companies went bankrupt. Many jobs disappeared. The economy of many countries was simply put on hold for a while. But in a relatively short amount of time, the majority of the economic indexes went back to their normal levels, and some stocks even reached all-time highs. So did these governments do the right thing in printing more money? Unlike traditional liberal economic theory, which states that more money in circulation causes inflation, there is this new modern monetary theory, which states in a very simplified way that as long as the government maintains a monopoly over money, it can print as much as needed to maintain a sustainable economy. The problem is that no one has actually tested this out on a large scale. The experiment is happening right now, and we are the guinea pigs. In some places, it could work, in others, not. Take Japan, for example. It is a country with a lot of debt. But so far it has never gone into a total economic collapse. But if you look at Brazil in the 80s, where hyperinflation reached this 80% level that destroyed the economy in the Yuan dynasty, you know what happened. Even with 40% of the world's money being issued over the last year, so far the economic indicators seem to be under control. Inflation has not increased proportionally like that in any country. One reason for this could be the mismatch between money issuance and inflation, or the velocity of money circulation. Inflation happens when there is full employment, and service providers and product suppliers are working at full capacity. And that has not happened because of the movement restrictions that have been put in place due to the pandemic. So even though things are good at the moment, the collapse could happen in a few years' time. Inflation normally happens after some time, after the economy recovers. This is what happened, for example, in Germany in the 1920s. They started printing money, and they became prosperous for a while. And soon after came hyperinflation, which led to the collapse of the economy. This took about 5 years, which indicates that the same thing could still happen to your money in the few years to come. That is why you need to be very aware of these changing times. So invest in knowledge. Take care of your money. Be careful not to leave all your reserves dependent on just one investment, just one currency. Since we are the guinea pigs for an unprecedented experiment, then let's at least reduce the chances of harm by protecting our assets as best as we can. The pandemic brought a never-before-seen situation to the world economy. 40% of the money in circulation today just didn't exist a few years ago. Some people say that this will lead to hyperinflation that is capable of collapsing the global economy. But others say that while there is a monopoly over money, well, the governments can issue as much money as they need to revive the economy. Only time will tell us who is correct. And that is why you need to be getting ready for all types of situations. The best way to prepare is by investing in your financial knowledge, to protect, to multiply your wealth. And for those with an interest in this type of knowledge, I invite you now to watch a lesson from our financial course, Truly Wealthy. And you can watch this special class by accessing the link arata.se/trulywealthy.